Welcome to Zoom to Gettysburg, tonight World War II. Before we start, this program is a friendly informational discussion with LBGs and our guests. The program leaders and moderators require polite and courteous behavior of all participants. The LBGs will make every effort to provide accurate historical information. However, the information provided in group discussions may be subject to different interpretation among participants. Information shared does not guarantee passing and or successful completion of any test, exam, class, or course, including but not limited to the NPS licensed battlefield guide test. The moderators reserve the right to limit discussion and comments during the program. And also this evening, I am going to be recording this. Ralph's going to do, this is a pretty cool presentation, so I'm going to record it. He's got a bunch of PowerPoint slides. So if that bothers you, you can mute your mic and take your video down, and your name will just be up there, or change your name. But other than that, we are going to start recording. So with that, Ralph, you have the floor.
All right, well, good evening, everybody. Somebody wave your hands like this if for some reason you can't hear me, because I can hear myself just fine. And through the magic of Zoom, welcome to the Soldiers National Cemetery. This is one of the old maps that shows the various state cemetery plots for the National Cemetery, the Civil War burials. When I say old map, you see where the visitor center used to be, right across the street from the entrance. Can everybody see that? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep.
This is my census of the grave sites in the Soldiers National Cemetery, including the annex. A 5-acre annex that was added in the 1960s. So we have 3,636 Civil War graves, 3,512 from the Battle of Gettysburg, and the other 124 were added in the 2 years, actually many years after, local Adams County residents who were in the war. The old section of the cemetery, the 17-acre section that Judge Wills acquired, holds 5,206 grave sites. The annex added another 1,700 for a total in the National Cemetery of 6,917. And the reason I go through these statistics is because I thought it was impressive that 25% of those numbers, those grave sites, are marked World War II. So while we do have a large, obviously it is an important Civil War cemetery, there's a very large representation of World War II dead. The list that I've compiled, the research I've done, shows that we have 487 grave sites marked World War II, whose dates of death coincide with the years of the war, 1941 to 45. There's another 7 whose dates coincide with those years, but they're not marked World War II, so they remained a question mark. 442 of them were killed in action or died of wounds suffered in action, and 45 were classified as died not in battle, but as I'll discuss later, I think that classification is extremely suspect. I think almost all of those are killed in action. Oh, there's the number 487. Everybody's seeing these little circles as I circle them as they pop up? Okay. So question, how do these World War II dead, if they're killed at the fighting in the Battle of the Bulge on Omaha Beach, how is it they're buried in Gettysburg? Well, originally they're buried in Europe. And from 1947 to 1949, the bodies, if the families asked for it, are brought back to the United States. This is what they call one of the Liberty ships leaving France with hundreds and hundreds of American caskets on it. This particular ship setting sail in 1947 to bring these bodies back to the United States for reinterment in United States cemeteries. In 1947, Gettysburg was the only national cemetery in the state of Pennsylvania. Today, there are 3 others, much, much larger than Gettysburg, but at that time, Gettysburg was it. Here's a picture of the caskets being unloaded from the ship, loaded onto trains, Pallbearers carrying the caskets. This is big events back then. Life magazine has a wonderful archive of these photographs. This is a personal photo that a friend gave me. One of the people we'll talk about later, William Stump, 5th Rangers. This is his burial site in Gettysburg. That's his casket for reinterment in 1948 in Gettysburg. So that's where they come from. Where they're located is in 3 sections. The first section, interestingly enough, is named Section 1. And that's the first section that would have burials on the outside of that roadway that we have in the National Cemetery. So it's the first section that will be populated with grave sites outside the semicircle. Here's Section 1. Here's our bus driver. Everybody recognizes him, I hope. Roy Frampton standing in the Pennsylvania section. Section 1 is behind him. Did everybody see that stripe on the PowerPoint? Is this all working okay? Do this if you see it. Tom Lynn, you see? Yeah, okay, they're very good. Here's me using the gravestone of John Davidson to try to stand up, also in Section 1. I'll talk about John Davidson later. Section 2 has the largest concentration of World War II dead. Now our bus driver has moved to Section 2. Roy is showing us the gravesite of William Miller, Medal of Honor recipient from the Battle of Gettysburg, but behind him, most of those are World War II killed in Section 2. There's another picture of Section 2, another angle. And Section 3 is a beautiful sloped section. It's right behind the Gettysburg Address Memorial, the Lincoln bust on the Gettysburg Address Memorial, that slope that everyone likes to take pictures of. Most of those grave sites are also World War II. And it's the only really sloping ground, and so it's very popular with photographers. Here's a Google Earth picture of our cemetery. The most important landmark, of course, up there is Tommy's Pizza. There's the Soldiers Monument, the Gettysburg Address Memorial, Evergreen Cemetery and the Annex. That's Section 1, Section 2, and Section 3. So what I did in my research, which began, oh Lord, 15 years ago, doesn't that make me sound old? I am old. I took photographs of every single gravestone that had the dates of death coinciding with the Second World War. 494 gravestones. It was easier with a digital camera to make the images and type that all into a database, which this is showing you that I have compiled. If anybody would like this, I'd be happy to email it to them. It is a spreadsheet format. I used this database with the National World War II Memorial, which at the time was compiling records on the 405,000 Americans killed in action in the Second World War. And they gave me access to the database that they were compiling of these dead. Since then, this database is completed and gone public, and you can just go online and Google it. National World War II Memorial Registry. And there's now tens of thousands of names on there, but it all has 405,000 names of those killed in action. The reason they put it together so visitors to the memorial can go up to this kiosk and type in names and read about people who are commemorated in World War II. So it is now open to the public. I was using it when they were still building the website to learn about these men. Of the 487, what's really compelling to me is how young they are. Of this number, 95 are under the age of 21 and 58 are teenagers. Only 40 of them are over the age of 30. At Gettysburg, we have 7 generals buried, 1 from the Civil War and 6 from World War II. So again, it shows the prominence of the World War II presence. I have a few guides and historians with me, so I'll talk a little bit about the research. This fellow's interesting, 1st Infantry Division, Felix Ziewankowski. The spelling of that name does not exist in the 50 states of the United States. Therefore, it was kind of hard to find any information about him. I went to AT&T in Pasking Ridge, where they have electronic versions of all the phone books. and they could not find this spelling anywhere in the country. So it's hard to find any information. This is probably the way his name is supposed to be spelled. Zwiankowski, there's thousands of them, but the one on the stone, we don't know. Gilbert Dennison from Colorado. So we have men buried from here, interred at Gettysburg from quite far away. Here's a picture of the state of Colorado. Can everybody see that? Yeah, Dennison was actually from California. I guess it began with a C, so we're glad we were close. Not from Colorado, from California. It's one of the errors on our stones. John Black is a popular gravestone in section 2, way in the back on the far left. Not to be confused with John Black of the 1st Delaware Infantry Regiment. Our John Black, as you can see, has the Star of David on his gravestone. He's the only one of the 487 World War II dead who has a Star of David on his gravestone. And when you see this gravestone, if any of you know this grave marker, it frequently has stones placed on it, pebbles placed on it, which is a Hebrew tradition for marking graves. They don't mark them with flowers. They mark them with rocks. And so there frequently are stones on top of John Black's monument. Unfortunately, when you look up his grave registration card at the visitor center, John Black was a Protestant. The stone is an error. I'm sure he doesn't mind the decorations, but and then here's William Allison, who for more than 12 years, I had no idea who this man was. It's a little embarrassing to tell you the truth. He died in July of 1945. He was a 2nd lieutenant. We don't know what war because it doesn't tell us. Being 56 years old in 1945 is a little old for a 2nd lieutenant in the infantry. So it probably was World War I, where he would have been 28 in 1917. But because it's not properly marked, he was one of my 7 mysteries, William Allison. I would come to find out that William Allison, to my embarrassment, native of Gettysburg, was a professional historian, chief historian at Fort McHenry in Baltimore. And when he retires, he becomes the superintendent of the Gettysburg National Cemetery. He lives in that house that's over by the Baltimore Gate. He's living there when he passes away. So he was already in the cemetery when he died. William Allison was also a licensed battlefield guide. He actually was the president of the Battlefield Guides, and he wrote this book, The Story of Gettysburg as Told by the Guides. So now we know who William Allison is, not a World War II veteran. Another unique thing in our cemetery, I don't know how many of you know this, but if you see a grave marker that says "in memory of," like this for this Navyman Kermit Stott, in memory of means it is a cenotaph. It is an empty grave. The body was not recovered. This is a memorial. Now, this is not true in civilian cemeteries, where they'll put "in memory of" on gravestones. But all veteran cemeteries, all national cemeteries in the United States, Arlington and all the other ones, "in memory of" means that person's not actually there. This is a cenotaph, an empty grave. There is Kermit Stott. His ship went down. He was on a destroyer that went down in the Battle of Leyte Gulf in 1944. The entire crew was lost. He's located in section 3 of the cemetery, in about 2 rows in over on the right side. So now we'll tell the story of the war. We are fortunate that we have enough World War II dead buried here that we can actually go in sequence. Something I can't do in the cemetery, but I can do in the PowerPoint. To do this in the cemetery, I'd have to run back and forth between the 3 sections. You all recognize these pictures, of course, I hope. Regis Bodecker is one of our most well-known burials. A lot of people see him because he's in the first row of section 2, right by the Baltimore Gate. Killed at Pearl Harbor. He was a yeoman first class he's 24 years old, so he's been in the Navy for some time. His family's from Pittsburgh, so they asked for him to be buried here, but he actually lived with his wife and child in Alameda, California, temporarily assigned in Pearl Harbor on the USS Helena. USS Helena gets very hard hit in the attack on Pearl Harbor. There's an aerial photo of the attack coming in because the USS Helena is located in the berth where the Japanese attack pilots expect to find this ship, the USS Pennsylvania, the flagship of the Pacific Fleet. But she is in dry dock. So the Helena is berthed where the Pennsylvania was supposed to be. And as a result, the Helena got shellacked. It had the heaviest number of losses of any non-battleship in the attack at Pearl Harbor. There were 26 men killed, 50 wounded, taken to the hospital, of which 5 of them died that night in the hospital, including Regis Bodecker. This picture shows the fire on the left is the Helena burning. The only picture that I know of in the attack that actually shows where that Helena was on fire. Eugene Bubb is in the 4th row in section 2. Eugene Bubb, U.S. Army, 19 years old, from York, Pennsylvania. The first soldier from York, Pennsylvania to die in the Second World War. Possibly one of the first in the state of Pennsylvania, you wouldn't expect. He was coastal artillery, located at Fort Kamahama, 41st Coastal Artillery Battery, anti-aircraft guns. George Stembrowski, one of the great stories of the Battle of Pearl Harbor. There's the USS Nevada. The USS Nevada, unlike the other battleships, was iron hot. Most of them are iron cold. The engines were asleep. The Nevada had new engines, and they had fired them up. It takes several hours to bring these boilers up to steam. The Nevada was testing its engines on December 7th. And so the Nevada, even though it had been hit by a torpedo and a bomb, was able to get underway. An amazing photograph of the Nevada trying to get out of Pearl Harbor. She's still on fire, but she set sail. The second wave of the Pearl Harbor attack comes at 9 o'clock, and the Nevada was beached at Lookout Point so that she wasn't sunk in the channel. They were hit by more bombs, and George Stembrowski and about 45 other sailors were killed in the second wave of bomb attacks. Story has kind of a, I don't know if happy ending is the right word. This is the Nevada and her sister ship, the Texas, crossing the English Channel on June 5th, 1944, heading to the bombardment of the Normandy beaches. So the ship was rehabilitated, reconstructed, and sent to the Atlantic. There are the grave sites in section 2. Stembrowski and Bodecker are both in the front row on either side of a very ironic Japanese maple tree. An easy to find, bright red maple tree, and you can find their 2 graves. Bubb is about 4 rows behind Bodecker. After the attack on Pearl Harbor and at multiple other locations, the Japanese rapidly took command of the Western Pacific, Indochina. They already invaded China years earlier, captured the northern side of New Guinea, and of course the Philippines dramatically overwhelmed, including the Americans on the Corregidor and Bataan Peninsula. George Bard, 36 years old, from Washington, D.C., was a member of the 31st Infantry, the Polar Bear Regiment. I learned about Bard and acquired his picture. Those of you might remember the former law enforcement ranger at Gettysburg, Ryan Levins, now down at Harpers Ferry. Ryan's father was in the 31st Infantry, and he did a lot of research on them. So George Bard, 31st Infantry, captured together with 12,000 Americans in what led to in April of 1942, that led to the horrific Bataan Death March, where 10,000 American and Philippine prisoners died on the march. George Bard made it to Camp Cabanatuan, specifically holding Americans, 6,000. And in the months of May, June, and July, 3,000 of those 6,000 died of disease. So it really was a death camp. As you can see by the date of death, George hung on longer than most of his friends, but he did die that following November, probably of yellow fever and severe malnutrition. The survivors at Camp Cabanatuan, there's where George Bard is in section 2, 4 rows back. Survivors of Camp Cabanatuan is a picture of when they were liberated in 1945. This is one of the great Japanese atrocities of the war. There's the Cabanatuan Memorial. An interesting side note for World War II fans, historians, students like myself. There's a 20% chance that a Cabanatuan burial, because of course there were no grave markers in the American cemetery, they just buried them, threw the body in a ditch and threw dirt on it. So these bodies were disinterred but could not be identified. There were 4 among the 19 caskets that were selected, brought to Hawaii, and one of them selected at random to be the World War II veteran who's buried at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington. There's a 20% chance that it's a Cabanatuan veteran buried there because of the number of caskets that they recovered and selected from at random. The other picture, I think I said, is the Cabanatuan Memorial in the Philippines where the camp was located. You see this map, everybody, I hope, and it shows the important communications line from the west coast of the U.S. and the Hawaiian Islands to Australia and New Zealand. The Japanese wanted to cut this off. In May, they prepared a large naval battle to prepare for an invasion of northern Australia. That was the Battle of the Coral Sea that took place May 7th and 8th. And while it seemed sometimes as a draw, it actually was an American victory because we prevented the Japanese invasion. Coral Sea is known in naval history as the first battle in which the combatant ships could not see each other. In fact, they were 200 miles away as a battle of the aircraft carriers. So after their efforts at Coral Sea failed, the Japanese concentrated on the Solomon Islands, where they were going to build an airfield on a large flat island. That airfield, when it's finished, aircraft will be able to threaten the American communications between Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, and the West Coast. This could not be tolerated. So the Solomon Islands, 1st Marine Division was sent into this island. Nobody could pronounce, nobody could spell, and within several weeks, it became a household name in the United States. And this is one of the most notable veterans in the National Cemetery. This is Paul Heller. He enlisted in the Marines in Savannah, Georgia at the age of 14 years old. He had his 15th birthday in New Zealand, and he went into Guadalcanal, was killed in October in the fighting on the Mantancanal River. This is his grave site in the back of Section 2. I have any teenagers on tour in the cemetery, I was taken back to see Paul Heller and asked them to read the date, birthday and date, and asked them to figure out how old he was. And after 20 minutes, I tell them how old he was because nobody can do math anymore. This is the document that would have gotten Paul Heller thrown in federal prison because he lied about his age. His enlistment document in the Marine Corps in Savannah, Georgia. Photos from Guadalcanal. Hey, I'm trying to do a program here. Be quiet. My dog is obviously impressed with the picture. Hold on a moment. Come here. Stop it. Yeah. Stephen Parana, a little bit older. Jesse Leroy Phillips. Guadalcanal was also known for severe naval fighting, all of it taking place at night. So many ships were sunk. It came to be known as Iron Bottom Sound. Carl Swanson, U.S. Navy, died in the fighting in the Iron Bottom Sound. This is where their grave sites are located in Section 2. Heller all the way in the back. I'm going to send you back to the shelter. Oh, my Lord. Hold on a moment. I'm sorry. You have to stop it. I'm on the thing here. Knock it off. All right. I'm back. Sorry. To stay in the Pacific for a moment, Thomas Aston. Thomas Aston was from Pittsburgh, 26-year-old fighter pilot flying the P-40 Warhawk. George Hazlitt from Gibsonia, Pennsylvania, ended up becoming a major in the 16th Air Force Pursuit Squadron. He was the training officer for the 23rd Air Force. These men were fighting the Japanese year and a half before Pearl Harbor. They were the Flying Tigers, the American Volunteer Air Force fighting in China. And we have two of them buried here at Gettysburg. When the war begins officially, they are converted to the 23rd Air Force and continue fighting, flying out of India and Burma over the Himalayas and into China. Hazlitt is located back in row 10 in section 3. The iconic monument for the Marines, Battle of Iwo Jima. We have 3 veterans, one stone, I'm afraid, almost impossible to read. Robert Livingston, Marvin Siglin, he's 18 years old. Robert Livingston, 23. Captain Roger Seaschultz on the far right. The gravestone looks a lot cleaner today. They've done a nice job restoring them. I just don't have a better photo. I'll be getting one. 26-year-old captain from Philadelphia, highest-ranking Marine, killed on the 4th day at Iwo Jima. He was a platoon commander in a tank battalion, 4th Tank Battalion, Roger C. Schultz. So that's the Pacific. That's where the Livingston and Siglin are located in section 2. War, of course, for the Americans in Europe begins in Africa. Landings on the beaches in Morocco and Tunisia. We will trap and capture 150,000 German soldiers in Tunisia over the course of the next 7 months. Killed in the fighting in Africa, Loyal Hoffman from Westmoreland County, 25 years old, and Marauder co-pilot James Pogue, who was 26, is also from Pittsburgh. That's where they're located. From Africa, we finally brought the war to the mainland of continental Europe. The first attack was in Sicily. July 10th, 1943, Operation Husky. George Leetcam, member of the brand new Airborne Infantry, the 82nd Airborne Division, and this was their first major drop. They had done several drops over the years, over the months in the campaign in Africa, but they were all fairly small. Several companies, battalion-sized drops. Now was a big drop, 144 C-47s taking off from Benghazi and Tripoli, flying over the Mediterranean in the dark to drop 3,400 paratroopers in mainland Sicily behind the beaches. Underneath them in the ocean between Malta and Sicily were 500,000 American and British infantry troops on cargo ships. All right, that's not my side. And the Navy was guarding these cargo ships with anti-aircraft destroyers and cruisers and was very nervous that the Germans would attack. These cargo ships are defenseless, each of them carrying 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 men. One of the Navy ships hears aircraft overhead, gets nervous, opens fire. Everyone sees the tracers going up in the dark. Everyone opens fire, and 23 of the aircraft of the 82nd Airborne Division are shot down in one of the greatest friendly fire catastrophes of the Second World War. More than 300 paratroopers are killed, including George Leetcam. He's 24 years old, also from Pittsburgh. The second in command, the deputy commander of the division, Charles Kierans, was also killed in that accidental shoot down. British lost almost as many men when their gliders accidentally detached too early and crashed into the water instead of landing on land. So the whole airborne operation in Sicily was a big mess. And as a result, they learned never to do it again. Here's a photograph, frequently misidentified as a D-Day photograph. This is actually a photograph from Operation Husky from the 82nd Airborne Jump. An expert reenactor explained to me how this gear that they're carrying was no longer used in 44. So this is a 1943 photograph. And because of the losses in Sicily, right, they would learn that this is too risky and they wouldn't do it. No, not at all. D-Day, which we recognize in 2 days from now, the jump was 3 times larger, 3 divisions, 13,000 men. But they learned. They made the airplanes come in on a specific route, different from where the Navy ships were, and the Navy was told, be careful what you shoot at. This is the flight line, this is the flight route that the C-47s are taking. Don't shoot at anything in the flight line. And what they did at the last minute, this is where Lead Cam is buried. At the last minute, they painted stripes on all the airplanes. Figuring, what are the chances the Germans are going to figure this out fast enough and find enough white paint and imitate the paint? And so the C-47s, here you see 2 of them. These are reenactor modern aircraft. It's not a battle time photo. Oh, for God's sakes. Sorry, I'm going to have to kill that dog. So you see the white stripes were painted on them to help identify these as friendly aircraft. Last year, you know, was the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And in tribute to this, the 495th Fighter Squadron in Lakenheath, England, painted their F-15 Eagles with the 3 white stripes just as a tribute. And they flew over the beaches in Normandy as part of the 75th anniversary. So I like showing that picture. I think that's kind of cool. Also killed in the landings at Sicily, George Beals, first lieutenant engineer, recipient of the Silver Star, and John Somuk, 4th Ranger Battalion. Somuk was only 3 months past his 17th birthday, so he enlisted in the Army Rangers at the age of 16. So then to D-Day itself, this is a LST, a landing ship tank. The various craft that were used in the landings get very complicated. LST is the biggest one. This is the reenactor ship, the LST Peter Maguire, run by volunteers who sail it around Pittsburgh and down the Ohio River and the Monongahela. They park it, tourists get on for $10 a ticket, and they get to walk around and see what these ships look like. This is the last sailing LST. LSTs can carry 20 trucks or 10 tanks. They go up, you see the bow opens. They were doing a practice operation with the LSTs on April 28th at a place called Slapton Sands in southern England that was very similar in texture to Utah Beach. So it's a practice on Utah Beach. The LSTs made a maneuver at dawn to practice pulling into the beach and offloading. Operation Tiger ran into a disaster when a patrol of German patrol boats ran into them completely by accident and hit the LSTs with torpedoes. 2 of them, one of them was set on fire, 2 others were hit and sunk. 680 sailors and soldiers died in this great accident that occurred two months before the D-Day landings. Very troubling and vexing to Eisenhower that this could be allowed to happen. Again, they learned and they adapted. They adapted by making sure the ships were in protected lanes and that there were patrols to prevent PT boats. Private Stephen Schwartz was on one of those LSTs. From Copley Borough, which is a little town just outside of Allentown, Schwartz, 24 years old, was a member of the 557th Quartermaster Railhead Company. Troops that would go in with heavy equipment and set up the first rail terminal to start moving supplies. He was on one of those LSATs and he died on April 28th in Exercise Tiger. It's actually quite unusual that we have someone from this operation buried at Gettysburg. The odds are 1 in 500 that a cemetery this size would have someone from Exercise Tiger. That's where he's buried, sort of in the left rear section, 5th row on the left. You can find Stephen Schwartz. This is the bodies washed ashore and slept in sands. Here's Eisenhower addressing the men of the 101st Airborne. This is where I'm supposed to get people laughing. I'm not getting the reaction
I'm laughing. I get it.
Okay, there's the actual picture. One of the most famous photographs from the Second World War. Eisenhower on June 5th, addressing the 101st Airborne, taking his time to talk to them, because the estimate was that the 101st and the other airborne divisions would suffer 50 to 60% casualties. So he had some time. That's where he spent it. We have two men from the 101st Airborne, John Lawford and Frank Matera, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The 506 Parachute Infantry, 101st Airborne Division, both killed in Normandy, not on D-Day and the landings, but within weeks after the landings. 506 Parachute Infantry, Easy Company, that was the basis for the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers, so that's the same regiment that these men were in. So on the D-Day landings itself, made famous in the movie Saving Private Ryan as the dark green sector. On that sector is the one of there's 13 men buried at Gettysburg who lost their lives on June 6th. Claris Riggs is the one about whom I know the most and have this really nice photograph. Claris Riggs, look at my notes to make sure I get it. He's 21 years old from Coalport, Pennsylvania. 116th Regiment, 29th Infantry Division. Second row in Section 2 is a big man, 6'2", BAR operator, the semi-automatic heavy rifle. We know about Claris Riggs, thanks to my friend, historian, the late Jerry Desco, Gettysburg, who wrote about Claris Riggs and about Harold Baumgarten, who in his autobiography, D-Day Survivor in 2006, describes what happens with Claris Riggs, who he's standing right behind in the Higgins boat. I'm going to read this. This is from Harold Baumgarten, that's him, reading about what happened when this boat reached the beach. The Company B boat to our left blew up, and we were showered with wood, metal, and body parts, and of course, blood. The lowering of the ramp on our boat was like a signal for every German machine gun to open up on our exit. Claris Riggs was shot dead on the ramp and fell face down into the water. I dove in behind him, and only my helmet was creased by a bullet. There I was, standing neck deep in bloody red water, my rifle above my head. That's where Claris Riggs is, second row, sort of behind that Japanese maple tree. William Stump was on Omaha Beach, and he's a terrific story. 5th Rangers, I want to prepare you to see his photograph because he is a nasty-looking character. This is a guy you send it with enough ammunition into Berlin, he finds Hitler and the war's over. Look at him. I mean, there's a guy you want to make a movie out of. 19 years old. 5th Ranger Battalion. He's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There he is with some of his Ranger buddies, ready to go, make Hitler sorry he ever started this thing. 5th Rangers went in on Dog Green Beach with 116th Infantry Regiment. Ray Safranek from Richmond, Virginia is William Stump's nephew. He's been with me on battlefield tours. He's given me these photographs and gave me all this information about William Stump here. He was on the tour with me last June 6th, the 75th anniversary of D-Day. William Stump went ashore on Omaha Beach, lost his gun, ran across the sand to the pebble shingle to get out from under the enemy fire, and banged up against this guy, took a cigarette out, and tried to light a cigarette and asked the guy he banged into if he could have a light. The guy he banged into is Brigadier General Norman Cota, second in command of the 29th Infantry. On the left is the picture of Norman Cota. On the right is the actor Robert Mitchum, who plays Norman Cota in the movie The Longest Day. Obviously, Cota was well cast up, you know, not quite as good looking as Robert Mitchum, but he lights William Stump's cigarette, looks at the men around him and says, "What outfit is this?" And they say, 5th Rangers. And he points to the Coville Draw, the big stone wall at the Coville Draw. He points and he yells, "Rangers lead the way." And from that moment, that is where the U.S. Army Ranger motto that exists to this day was created. Rangers lead the way. That moment that William Stump witnessed. This is the envelope of a letter and a postcard William Stump will send to his cousin, Hilda Budabaugh. She is a nurse, a Navy nurse at the Atlantic City Navy Hospital. There she is. And he sends her this postcard somewhere in France. I can't say where they are, 5th Rangers. Love and best wishes, Bill. This envelope is dated December 3rd. William Stump was killed on December 2nd in sniper fire in the fighting around Metz. Very heartbreaking. That's where William Stump is located. Important in the landings on D-Day also is Utah Beach. Utah Beach, relatively painless compared to the violence in Omaha Beach. Omaha Beach, 2,500 American casualties in the first 45 minutes. On Utah Beach, the 4th Infantry comes in, followed by the 90th Infantry, and they had 180 killed and wounded the whole day. So they really landed where the Germans weren't, which was a good idea. Very small number of casualties compared to the rest of the beaches on D-Day. And we have one of them, Joseph Fetish, 4th Infantry Division. Joseph Fetish is from Hudson, Pennsylvania, 20 years old, Tech 5. He is an M7 driver. He's buried there in Section 2 of the National Cemetery. The M7 self-propelled armored 105 millimeter howitzer, nicknamed the Priest because the commanding officer's hatch kind of looked like the pulpit in a church. Here's a combat photograph of an M7 moving through a town in France. The driver is looking out through the hatch and the officer's up in the pulpit of the Priest. The M7 self-propelled howitzer turned out to be a very effective anti-tank weapon. As they were coming in on Utah Beach, 4 of these were on a landing craft tank. It's not a big thing. It's big enough to hold 4 of these. LCT 458 hit a mine and sunk. 59 men went down with the 4 M7s, including Joseph Fetish. Frank Kesnowski, military police. Traffic cop on Omaha Beach. Can you imagine how dangerous and difficult that would be? Trying to keep open the vehicle lanes, trying to get the trucks moving, telling soldiers go to the left, tanks go to the right. 11th Corps go to hell. Okay, that's an inside joke, you know. And Kesnowski is killed on Omaha Beach. He's from Somerset, Pennsylvania. That's at 24, 25 years old. I have my notes missing. We can read his gravestone. So he's 23 years old, 24 years old, from Somerset, Pennsylvania, where the United Flight Memorial is today. Frank Kesnowski. Military police training occurs at Fort Gordon, Georgia, or at least it did for most of the last 75 years. They've now apparently moved it. But the main classroom at Fort Gordon, Georgia is called Kesnowski Hall. So we have Frank Kesnowski, but they named their main educational building in Fort Gordon after this man, buried here at Gettysburg. He's in the 3rd row in Section 3, easy to find. Byron Stanton, 116th Infantry. Richard Brantoni's 19 years old. 19 years old, 1st Infantry Division. They're located there in Section 2. William Laffin, Staff Sergeant, is the highest ranking of the D-Day veterans that we have from Clinton, Pennsylvania. He's a very front row in Section 1, easy to see from the walkway. William Copeland, recipient of the Silver Star, of the Bronze Star, killed on Omaha Beach, 1st Infantry. I still don't know what he did. My research continues. He's back in row 10, in Section 3. Alfred Augustine and Howard Nutt were engineers. Lots of engineers landing on the beach to take care of the mines and the obstacles. Lots of them will be killed. Howard Nutt, only 19 years old. He's located in the 4th row of Section 1. George Hahn, he's 32 years old. Forrest Rice, 23. Elmer Warman, This is where they're located in Section 2. This is a dubious photograph of John Clister, meaning I'm not sure it's him. It's posted at Find a Grave and other locations as being the veteran John Clister buried at Gettysburg. John Clister was, the picture shouldn't have come up so fast, so ignore the photos for the moment. John Clister, you see his date of death is June 9th, 1944. John Clister was military police. The problem I have with this picture is the motorcycle has that painting, it has engraved on it, "My Aachen Back," a pun on the German town of Aachen. Clister wasn't there long enough to get near Aachen, so I don't know why that would have been painted on his motorcycle, which makes me wonder that this might not be him. But this is the gravesite of John Clister, who was officially registered as missing in action on June 6th, and his body was identified June 9th, so that's the date of death that they put on him. Military police officer, 29th Infantry. Pictures on the slide are my dear friend Bill Patton from Cape May Point, New Jersey. Passed away 2 years ago at the age of 94. And a Navy picture of him. Bill Patton was on the USS Emmons, a destroyer patrolling off of Omaha Beach. And Bill Patton told me the story that after the fighting had died down, the men on his destroyer were fishing bodies out of the water. And those bodies would be transferred to tenders and taken back to England, where it's quite plausible it would take several days before they'd be officially identified. I think John Clister was fished out of the water and would not be identified until June 9th. Remarkably, Eric Dorr, the proprietor of the Gettysburg Museum of History on Baltimore Street. Everybody, show of hands, you've been to Eric's museum. Eric has John Clister's helmet. He bought it at auction in Normandy, not knowing that John Clister was buried at Gettysburg. He would eventually find it out. And you see there's a photograph that he took with the helmet on John Clister's gravestone. I always wanted to kind of organize a tour where Eric comes along and we bring the helmet, but he's never there when I'm doing tours, so not yet. But there's John Clister's helmet. It's engraved with his name on the inside. You can go to Eric's museum, which is free of charge, and see John Clister's helmet. And he's buried in Section 3 in the third row, right in the center. John Clister, who I believe was killed in action, number 13, killed in action on D-Day. D-Day landings shown by the arrows. The objective was to isolate and capture the port of Cherbourg. Cherbourg would become crucial in the final months of 1944. From September to December, 500,000 American troops in 21 divisions would come into Europe through the port of Cherbourg. The Germans had destroyed the port and had heavily mined it, so it was important to repair the docks and the port works, and to also clear Cherbourg of mines. This is a World War II tender converted into a minesweeper, the Myantonoma. Myantonoma would be picking up mines and destroying them in Cherbourg Harbor, when on September 25th, it hit a mine itself and went down. On board the Myantonoma, I'm going in a different direction, I'm sorry, was Stanley McGargle, 17 years old, of Allentown, Pennsylvania. He had to get permission from his parents to enlist in the Navy at the age of 17. There he is. Him and 77 of his shipmates lost on September 25th when the Myantonoma went down in about 20 minutes after hitting a mine. He's located in the fourth row, sort of the right center side of Section 2. Easy to find. By the winter, the U.S. Army had established a line between Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. The Germans launched a massive attack on December 16th, pushing the line back, and the creative strategists and intelligence officers in the U.S. Army couldn't think of anything better than to call this the Battle of the Bulge, because of the bulge in the line. The Germans have a much better name. They call it autumn mist. Of course, it's not autumn, it's winter, and mist is a German euphemism for a different word that we won't pronounce in polite company, but the famous Battle of the Bulge, John Davidson is the only one buried in the National Cemetery killed on the very first day. December 16th, he was 14th Armored Cavalry, fighting in the Lowshine Gap. The cavalry regiment was hit by 2 SS Panzer divisions, and they fought in the Lowshine Gap for 3 days. Suffered 60% losses in the cavalry regiment, including John Davidson on the first day. He's in row 2 in section 1, easy to find. Our most famous of the Battle of the Bulge veterans, Frederick Clark, killed on the second day, December 17th, in the infamous Malmedy massacre. In the crossroads town of Malmedy, Belgium, in the north side, where the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion was taken prisoner. They disarmed the men, marched them into a snowy field, and shot them down. They were found by Allied forces 4 weeks later. They started marking the bodies, as you see in this photograph, in these photos. One of the massacres of the battle. Frederick Clark is in the second row on the far right end of section 2. The odds that we would have somebody from the Malmedy massacre buried at Gettysburg are 1 in 5,000. So it's remarkable that Frederick Clark, that we have someone like him to talk about this tragedy. My favorite, I have to say, however, is combat medic Lewis Flanagan from Philadelphia, 30 years old man in the regiment, 30th Infantry, Old Hickory, trained in the United States as a combat medic. Comes crucial in the operations, 30th Infantry, heavy fighting in August. Men in a forward observation post are badly wounded. Despite the artillery fire, Flanagan runs out between the shells, gets the men, gives them first aid, and drags them back, for which he's awarded the Bronze Star. I've asked Army historians, says, you gotta be kidding, this is Medal of Honor stuff. And they said, this is going on all day long in Normandy. That's what the fighting was like. It's amazing he was recognized at all. So Lewis Flanagan, he would be killed on Christmas Day, December 25th, doing the same thing. Wounded men out in the open, he goes out to get them. The next artillery shell that comes in kills him. Lewis Flanagan, 30 years old. This is his actual death notice telegram delivered to his widow, Catherine Flanagan, who had moved in with her parents in St. Louis. This is the actual copy of the death telegram that the family received. And this is Lewis Flanagan's actual Bronze Star and Purple Heart with the gold star device, showing that that was a Purple Heart for a killed in action. And the Bronze Star, again, I described, was awarded to him for action in the Mortain Gap in August. And this is his grandniece, Jennifer Strauss, a registered nurse and hospital administrator in Philadelphia, visiting her great uncle's gravesite. She's the one who gave me these medals and documents so I could share them with people during battlefield tours. Photographed at Lewis Flanagan's grave some years ago. Flanagan is right behind and really underneath the Japanese maple tree. So you have to really get up in the summer. You have to get up under that tree to find his grave, Lewis Flanagan. We have brothers buried in the National Cemetery, Frank and Edward Matarowicz, side by side in the third row in section 2. Frank Matarowicz, I mentioned already earlier, 506 Parachute Infantry, 101st Airborne Division, killed 6 days after D-Day. Frank Matarowicz's obituary says that he was a baseball standout in Etna, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh, Etna High School. He was a prospect as a pitcher. He was looked at by major league teams. I imagine he was the prom king. I'm not sure if he was, but it seems like he would have been. Younger brother Edward is overshadowed in every way. Edward Matarowicz joins the Army Air Forces, becomes a waist gunner on a B-24. His plane is shot down 4 days after Christmas, 1944, with the loss of the entire crew. So Edward was originally buried in Belgium. Frank buried at the cemetery above Omaha Beach. Family asked them to be brought home, and then they were buried at Gettysburg side by side. They're the only two brothers that I know of in the entire National Cemetery, including Civil War. The only two brothers buried side by side. We have several cousins with the same names, but these are the only two that I know of, brothers buried side by side. And if you look at the ranks, Edward Meterowicz will now overshadow his older brother in eternity because he is a sergeant, and Frank Meterowicz is simply a private. The reason for that is the boys who got into these bombers, no matter what their assignment was, they were all promoted to sergeants and non-commissioned officers, regardless of what their job was, because if they were shot down over Germany, they got better treatment in prison camps if they were officers. So it's a whole plane full of sergeants. Imagine how tough that must have been for the pilot who had to keep control of all these guys. This is Edward Meterowicz and his crew. And just, you know, these kinds of pictures are wonderful to look at. Look at the faces, the expressions they have, the officer, pilot, and co-pilot kneeling in the front, and the rest of the gunners in the back and the radioman. Entire crew lost on December 29th, 1944. Here's another crew I like to look at, the Moseley crew, B-24, and in particular, one man, Lieutenant Claire Truby, co-pilot of the Moseley crew that you just saw. And Claire Truby, when I saw his photograph, he's the one that convinced me that I would try to develop a World War II tour at the National Cemetery. Other guides who were doing tours would mention Bodecker or other World War II dead, Byron Stanton. But it was Truby that convinced me that I would try to collect enough stories and learn enough about these men to do an entire tour just of World War II. He's on the very end on row 3, very far right end of section 2, easy to find. And there's his picture blown up. And just look at the personality on that face. Look at the character and the personality. This is a guy who should be fixing hot rods on Saturday night and making life difficult for the fathers of young women like myself. Instead, he's co-piloting a bomber in the largest war in the history of the world. Claire Truby, 22 years old. There's their bomber, Winnie the Pooh. B-24 flying as part of in support of the D-Day landings. Will be badly damaged on June 8th in bombing run over Reims. Managed to get back in terrible weather to England, but while trying to land, crashes, the loss of the entire crew of 10 on June 8th. He's one of the people classified as died not in battle, which to me is insulting. The idea that these battle-damaged aircraft crashes when it gets home. There's a better picture of a B-24 Liberator, the largest 4-engine production aircraft in the history of aviation. 18,000 B-24 Liberators were built for the Second World War. No other 4-engine aircraft comes close in aviation history to those kinds of numbers. But more famous, of course, is the B-17. And this is our only, that I know of, B-17 pilot in the National Cemetery, buried in Section 3, behind the Lincoln Memorial, Bruce Evans. Bruce Evans, I want you to picture in your mind, what does a B-17 pilot look like? Just look at him. Can you believe that? Right out of Central Casting. 22 years old, 23, just had his 23rd birthday. Bruce Evans. This is from Sinclair, Pennsylvania, 486 Bomb Group. There's his bomber, Rack and Ruin, B-17 rack and ruin. The nose art was King Kong holding bombs. The wartime photographs. There's a photograph taken after Evans had to make a belly landing. Landing gear wouldn't come down because of battle damage. You can tell that because the blades are all bent back on the propellers when they augered into the ground when the plane had to skid to a landing on the grass. Bruce Evans is in row 9 in section 3. If you read his gravestone, if you walk down the slope and read his gravestone, you see at the bottom it says AM and 3 OLC. You're not supposed to be awarded a medal more than once. If you are qualified to receive the medal a second time, you don't get a second medal. You get an oak leaf device that you can attach to the ribbon of the medal. So Bruce Evans is awarded the Air Medal. You receive the Air Medal for flying 5 missions. And Bruce Evans would have 3 oak leaf clusters, which means he's awarded the Air Medal 3 more times. He's flown more than 20 combat missions flying to B-17. He's 23 years old. Just turned 23 a few days before his death. And he has the Air Medal and 3 oak leaf cluster. Bruce Williams. They're flying over Chemnitz on February 6th, industrial center, Far East Germany, trying to provide some support and assistance to the Red Army approaching from the Soviet side, bombing Chemnitz as a rail center and supply center for the Germans on the Eastern Front. Our anti-aircraft artillery fire, shell explodes, and Bruce Evans is killed. It's possible his co-pilot is also killed. They pull the plane out of the formation and they try to limp back all the way to England, but by the time they get to England, it's pitch dark, terrible weather. The airfields are all on blackout for fear of German bombing, and the plane runs out of fuel and crashes with a loss of the entire crew. On February 6, 1945. 1 month later, Bruce's daughter, Karen Seelick, is born. This is her. She's now a retired pediatrician in Ohio. And this is Bruce Evans's actual Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. She didn't know what to do with the medal. We couldn't find a museum. And so she gave it to me on permanent loan so I could show it to people during battlefield tours at Gettysburg. And I've been able to show this medal to hundreds of people. Now you can see a picture of it. You come on one of my cemetery walks and I'll let you see it up close and personal. His actual Air Medal with the oak leaf devices. This is another bomber, the B-26 Marauder. We'll finish up with the story of them. See how they're all jammed in the front. They want to be in the picture. Notice the bombardier is smoking a cigarette up in the nose. There's a less exciting photograph of a B-26 Marauder. Marauder pilot Elmer Oglietti from Armstrong County, Pennsylvania, 23 years old. 320th Bomb Group, 441st Bomb Squadron. 12th Air Force located in Italy. The air base is near Naples. Elmer Oglietti promotes from lieutenant co-pilot to captain pilot. And on March 22nd, Elmer Oglietti is promoted to squadron commander. He's the highest ranking airman we have in the National Cemetery. Captain Elmer Oglietti, promoted to captain of his own squadron, flying his first mission as squadron leader on March 22nd. I don't have a picture of Oglietti, but this is a picture of another unidentified crew. It's a bunch of clowns they are, and the official slogan of the 441st Bomb Squadron, the Finis Origine Pendet. The beginning defines the end. This is one of the B-26 Marauders in his group. Again, it's not him. This is the official report of the flight, March 22nd, showing Oglietti at the top as squadron commander, the highest ranking airman we have at Gettysburg. Oglietti doesn't get off the runway. His plane crashes at the end of the runway with the entire loss of the entire crew except himself. He lives for 2 days and dies of his injuries 2 days later. So Elmer Oglietti, buried in the third row in section 2. And I end on this to talk about the airmen, the losses that they suffered. We're at an hour, so I'll be wrapping it up, but bear with me. The United States Army Air Forces, the losses that they suffered in Europe are hard to imagine. We think about D-Day. We recognize D-Day on Saturday, the beginning of the invasion on the western side. But the airmen have been taking the war to Germany for 2 years, and have been suffering catastrophic losses in that period of time. That's why I think a lot of them are classified as accidental deaths and died not in battle, because the losses were so extreme that if the American public got an idea, there would have been an outcry. According to the proportions of the men killed in World War II and the number we have buried at Gettysburg by proportion, we should have 10 members from the U.S. Army Air Forces. We have 88. The losses that these guys suffered. The 8th Air Force, which is one of only 3 air forces operating the heavy bombers out of northern England, the 8th Air Force had more men killed than the Marine Corps in the Pacific in the entire Second World War. More than 26,000 men killed just in the 8th Air Force. There's also the 9th and the 12th Air Forces. These are pilots and co-pilots in the 8th Air Force that are all within spitting distance of Oglietti's grave in Section 2. From Theodore Kukowski to John Ott, mid-air collisions, bombing shoot-downs, they're all over the place. The losses were catastrophic until we got to late 1944. Elmer Oglietti is the large star, and these other pilots and co-pilots I mentioned are all gathered around him. And they're all over the cemetery. This is just a cluster right where he's buried. And this changes when American hot rod ingenuity brings into existence the P-51 Mustang, the first fighter plane that's capable of following the bombers all the way to their targets in Germany and escorting them all the way back. When the P-51 Mustang is introduced, the bomber losses drop immensely. The losses in bomber crews would really make a big difference because of what the bomber pilots would call their little friends, the P-51 Mustangs that could escort them all the way to Berlin and back. And we have several Mustang drivers in the National Cemetery, but Frederick Dorsch, who's buried only about 10 feet away from Oglietti, Frederick Dorsch is our fighter ace. 31st Army Air Force Fighter Group, P-51 Mustangs. Frederick Dorsch had 8 kills. If you had 5 shoot-downs, you were classified as an ace. Frederick Dorsch had 8. Here he's flying the P-51B Mustang. It was the first Mustang came out in the Spitfire airframe. And you see he would have 6 kills in this aircraft before he advances to the more familiar bubble top P-51 Mustang. 31st Fighter Group was the most highly decorated fighter group in the European theater, and these are their aces. Frederick Dorsch on the far left. Their aces posed in one of the P-51B Mustangs. And this is their plaque at the Hall of Fame at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado, showing the 2 Mustang types. The 31st Fighter Group, the 3 squadrons of the 31st Fighter Group. This is 120 aircraft, had 570 kills, a record in the European theater. So Frederick Dorsch is a row behind Oglietti, and I think important to end the story with the airmen because of the immense sacrifice and I'm afraid somewhat overlooked many times. Man I've been on battlefield tour at Gettysburg with, Professor Donald Miller from Lafayette College. Those of you who know Lafayette College, it's where Our heroic Edwin Coddington was the professor who wrote the great Study in Command about the Battle of Gettysburg. Donald Miller wrote the book Masters of the Air, and he's a consultant on the HBO project that should be airing next year on the Mighty Eighth, similar to the Band of Brothers, a 8 or 10-part series about the 8th Air Force in the Second World War. So with that, I wrap it up.